Thank you, KD, for filling in. Look forward to Ron feeling better. I know he's looking forward to that, and Jennifer and Amy as well. But it is good to have able substitutes. And I know he feels like he didn't do as well as others. But, man, that was really good. I appreciate that, KD. You did a great job. You remember as a child, you were maybe afraid of the dark? You ever check underneath your bed before you got in the bed, or made sure the closet door was shut? You know, it's interesting what darkness does to everyday objects, things sitting on the desk or things hanging in the closet. And they begin to conjure fear and terror and anxiety in children. And then as we grow up, we grow out of those childhood fears. But it doesn't mean that there aren't monsters in the closet. It doesn't mean there aren't still monsters under the bed. They just take a much different form than they did when we were children. There's a monster that looms large, threatening the peace and the security of a great nation, our United States of America. Like many nations before her, she faces possible extinction. That's a simple fact. No nation is impenetrable. No nation cannot be destroyed, especially if it is destroyed from within. And so the question is what is it that is the lurking monster in the dark when it comes to America? And the answer is liberty, freedom, and democracy. Now, don't get me wrong. I love those principles. I appreciate them every single day. When we gather together in peace without harm from governmental agencies to worship our God, that's our freedom, that's our liberty, that's the whole idea of the founding principles of this particular nation. This is the number one country for immigration in the entire world. More people want to come to the United States of America than any other country. At present, we have around 56 million immigrants in the United States of America. The closest country to us at number 2 is Germany at 15 million. We surpassed that by 40 million people. And you've got to ask yourself this question: why is America so popular? Why does everyone want to come here? Why is it when cameras sweep across foreign nations of people whose language is not English and they can eke out, "I want to come to America"? Why? It is because this country offers opportunity and freedom that no other country offers. Is there opportunity and freedom in other countries? Absolutely, there is. I'm not ignorant to those things. But those two factors are the reason why most people want to come here, because they find their highest degree of implementation here in this country. Does it mean that we have perfect freedom and perfect opportunity? No. We know that that's not true. But of all the nations in the world, we offer more freedom and more opportunities. In fact, our great condemnation isn't against, this country does it better than us, or this country does it better than we do. Our condemnation is we do not always rise to the highest ideals that we desire. In other words, it's a self-inflicted conflict between what is reality and what is what we want to have. But those two factors of freedom and opportunity are often taken for granted by natives to this country. People don't really care about the freedom or the opportunities, or don't hold them sacrosanct like other people. The people in other parts of the world look at those two factors about America and they say, "I want to be there." And there's so many people that are here that don't even consider those things, and they're thinking, "I don't want to be here." Isn't that odd how that changes? We are a nation that is founded on freedom and independence. Concepts, by the way, which did not originate with our founding fathers. They originated with God. In fact, think about God's theocratic governmental system whenever he established Israel as a nation. You know, he had Moses as his go-between to the people, but God was in control. And how did he treat people? Well, the first thing he did is he set up laws to govern how people would behave. Then he gave people the freedom of choice to follow those laws. And then he burdened them with responsibility. Take responsibility for what you do in either keeping that law or breaking that law. And if you broke it, of course, punishment. Think about how the United States of America deals with it. It sets up a nation founded upon laws. Then it gives people the freedom of choice to follow those laws or not follow those laws. And when people transgress them, there is punishment awaiting. That's not an American model. That is God's model of theocracy. We've simply copied it into our Constitution and the way our government is set up. In the years since its inception, the nation, our nation, we have been blessed with diversity and discovery and prosperity and strength and growth. And also during that same time, there are many peoples and lands and nations in the world that have been blessed with food and protection and even life itself from the United States of America. That's what gave it its reputation. Has it been perfect in history? No. Has it been a major force for good throughout the world? Yes. Absolutely. But America is hurting. It doesn't take long to look around and recognize that it's starting to crumble. The very ideals and foundations which the nation was founded upon are starting to crack. There is a barrage of defiance to God's design. Sex without marriage, homosexuality, pedophilia, promiscuity, adultery, corruption of gender, people transitioning, mutilating children who think they're a different sex than what they are. And brethren, that's normalized. Be one in public who says that's not right and see what happens. Go join a street corner in Denver with a sign that says transgendering children is mutilation. And you may be mutilated yourself. That's a simple fact. You see, our world is changing. Millions of preborn children are slaughtered on the altar of convenience. People are willfully ignoring the personhood of children in the womb. We don't talk about that. All the argument is over my body, my choice. Pretending that the child inside your womb is still your body, and yet it has a different heartbeat. It can have a different blood type. It obviously has a different DNA. It is a separate human being. But that child has no protection in our society. And it is simply the altar of convenience. I know they always talk about rape and incest and all the health of the mother and stuff, which constitute about 0.4% of abortions. Most all the others, convenience. If you want to have a conversation about the 0.4, we can do that, but let's work on the 99.6 of all the others. That's the conversation we need to be having, because America is hurting, and these are the reasons why it is hurting. It is to simplify and support an immoral lifestyle and immoral choices. I remember in Leviticus 18, verse 21, when he talks about no one shall sacrifice his child or give up his child to Molech. And some translations have there the literal Hebrew, to pass through the fire. They were burning their children to a false god as a sacrifice to that false god. And we see it today. They're not burning them, they're dismembering them and pulling them out of the womb. Not to Molech, but to convenience. America is absolutely hurting. There's corruption at all levels of government everywhere around us. And if that's not bad enough, we have the mass shootings and murder and rape and assault and all sorts of violent crimes. America has become the monster lurking in the darkness. Why? Because liberty and freedom without a moral foundation is a moral monster. That's simply the way it is. We have seen this and known this for a long time. What we as Christians can do to help heal our nations is to make people aware of the value, let me take that back, the necessity of morality in American citizens. And this goes for any other government in the world. Civilian morality. The history is overwhelming. Solomon said in Proverbs 14:34, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. When a society, when a culture begins to embrace the ways of sin, the ways which are not God's ways, when it thwarts the very design of God and glorifies evil and immorality for the sake of convenience or the sake of self, that is sinfulness, and it is a reproach to any nation, whether it's Israel or Rome or the United States of America. The other side of that coin, the beginning, righteousness exalts a nation. When as a collective we understand the value of morality. Johann Wolfgang Goethe, the German philosopher, poet, said of governments, he says, what is the best government? The one that teaches us to govern ourselves. Govern ourselves. How often do people enjoy restrictions in their lives? People don't like that. We want to do what I want to do when I want to do it for the reasons I want to do it. And who are you to stop me, right? That is the prevailing philosophy in the United States of America. I want to do what I want to do. This is the land of the free, right? I'm free to do it. And they are. But they also must bear the consequence of what they're doing. But most people don't want those consequences. They just want to do whatever it is that they want to do. What Goethe said is that in order for a nation to really survive, people need to govern themselves, restrain from vice and immorality in order to help the community. Henry Ward Beecher, a mid-19th century minister, said, there is no liberty to men whose passions are stronger than their religious feelings. There is no liberty to men in whom ignorance predominates over knowledge. There is no liberty to men who know not how to govern themselves. It was a common theme among the founding fathers. George Washington, of all the dispositions and the habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Indispensable means you can't take them away. This from his farewell address in 1796. He went on to say, let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths? In other words, the promises that we make to each other as a society, if those promises, those oaths are taken away and there is no sense of a religious obligation toward one another, then anything goes. A little further, he said, 'tis substantially true that virtue, also known as morality, is a necessary spring of popular government. Popular government is a reference to a government by the people, for the people, of the people and for the people. Self-government is a populist government, one that the people control what is happening at the highest levels. And he says we need to understand the necessary spring for self-government is virtue and morality. Ben Franklin, that skeptic, the deist Ben Franklin, in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. I know this is a history lesson, but I do not make apology for it. It is absolutely necessary for us to remember these things. It was at the Constitutional Convention, and talks were breaking down. Were we going to be a federalist? Were we going to be a united states? Was it going to be a federation or a confederation? What kind of government were we going to have? Was it going to go back to a monarchy even? when those talks were breaking down, he stood up. He says, "We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings," that from a skeptic, "that except the Lord building the house, they labor in vain that build it," quoting from Psalm 127. "I firmly believe this," Benjamin Franklin said, "and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel." In other words, God must be a part of this process. He went on to make this motion that every morning of the Constitutional Convention from here on out be started with prayer. Every day. We need to start this day with prayer. Eventually, the convention was over. He walked out, and a friend of his walked up to him and said, "Well, doctor, do we have a republic or a monarchy?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it." Those famous words, a republic if you can keep it. And it appears that we're losing our hold on keeping that republic. John Adams, the second president of the United States, said, "Religion and virtue are the only foundations, not only of a republicanism and of free governments, all free governments, but of social felicity under all governments." In other words, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what governmental structure they have, the underlying value or the underlying foundation of any one of them is religion and virtue. He wrote that in a letter to Benjamin Rush in 1811, after he had been president. He wrote in another letter, he said, "We have no government armed with power, capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion." In other words, we cannot deal with people if this society ever gets to the point where it is not bridled by religion and morality, there is not a big enough government to control what is going to happen. Simply not there. He goes on to say that avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. In other words, if we as a citizenry will not be virtuous and moral, then our Constitution is inadequate for this nation. In another letter, in an entry in his diary, he said, "One great advantage of the Christian religion is that it brings the great principle of the law of nature and nations, to love your neighbor as yourself, and do to others as you would have others do to you, to the knowledge, the belief, and the veneration of the whole people." That's what Christianity does. It brings the highest ethical values, social ethical values. Love your neighbor as yourself, and do unto others as you want them to do to you. He says Christianity brings that before everyone. It's not just for men. It's not just for women. It's not just for white people or black people or rich people or poor people or educated people. It is for everyone. That was the great value he saw in Christianity, because it was going to sustain this nation. James Madison said, "To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people is a chimerical idea." That's imaginary. It's a pipe dream, we might say today. In other words, if you think that we can have liberty and happiness without a virtuous citizenry, then you're dreaming. If we do not have a virtuous citizenry, we cannot have liberty and happiness. Sam Adams: "Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. He therefore is the truest friend of liberty of his country, who tries most to promote its virtue." You see, we in order to have liberty and happiness, we cannot have a corrupt society. We cannot have one that is dominated by vice and immorality. Jefferson, the other great skeptic of the founding fathers: "No government can continue good, but under the control of the people. And their people were so demoralized." He's talking about Rome. This is a letter between him and John Adams later in their lives. And he says that that Rome, their people were so demoralized and depraved as to be incapable of exercising a wholesome control. Their reformation that was to be taken up ab inconabilibus, it's a Latin phrase, and I don't even know, I didn't even spell it or pronounce it right, but it means from the cradle or from birth, okay? It says their reformation then was to be taken up at birth. Their only hope for changing the nation was to change children at their birth. Teach them while they were young. Their minds were to be informed by education of what is right and what is wrong, to be encouraged in habits of virtue and deterred from those vices of the dread of punishment, the proportioned indeed, but irremissible in all cases, to follow that which, in all cases to follow truth as the only safeguard and to eschew error which bewilders us in one false consequence after another in endless succession. These are the inculcations necessary to render the people a sure basis for the structure of good order and good government. In other words, Rome declined as immorality saturated Rome. Homosexuality grew. The killing of children. You think that we are a terrorist nation against children in the womb. They would execute children after birth. If by the age 1 or 2 or 3 they saw a defect in the child, they just murdered it. They just killed it. They didn't want that in their families. I mean, that is a depraved society, and that's why he refers to them as depraved and demoralized. But their only hope would have been to start teaching a new generation of children what is right and what is wrong. They didn't do that, and what happened to Rome? Well, now you go to the city and it's ruins of what it once was, a world empire reduced to a mere city, and that full of ruins. He's telling John Adams in that letter, that's what we must do. We must, from the cradle, be teaching our children what is good and what is wrong. And we're leaving that behind. We don't like to call things evil anymore. It's misunderstood. It's a mental illness. It's the result of somebody else is abuse or bullying of them. These things that's not evil. That's what we can. Well, guess what? That is evil. Sometimes that is just evil, and you cannot explain it away by all the modern terms of sociology. We just have to accept that it's evil, and the only way we can do that is to minimize its impact by teaching from the cradle what is good and what is evil. Jefferson understood that. John Henry said that a vitiated, it's a fancy word meaning impure, an impure mind or state of morals, a corrupt public conscience is incompatible with freedom. If people are immoral, you cannot have freedom. And that's what prompted, I think, Franklin to say, a republic if you can keep it. The founders understood the nation they were building required a strong moral foundation in order to survive, in order for freedom to work, because without it, liberty and self-governance becomes a moral monster. In the bulletin, I am addressing the same topics, I realize that, but I tell the story of, a group of 8 people are in a park and a stranger is walking up, and they tell the stranger when he gets there, oh, by the way, we're going to rob you. We're going to take everything you got. And the stranger says, oh, please don't do that. And the leader of the gang says, well, I'll tell you what, we'll make it democratic. We'll take a vote. And the stranger said, well, I'll abide by whatever the vote is. And so 6 of the gang voted to rob him. 1 sided with the stranger, and 1 abstained, as it often goes. And so with a vote of 6-2, robbing won the day. You see, that's what democracy without morality brings us. I know that's a simplified anecdote of it, but that's exactly what's happening in a nation right now that is governed by the majority, the idea of the majority anyway. And when the values of the majority are so foreign to righteousness and goodness and rightness, then the liberty that is afforded by democracy is a monster lurking in the dark. What's changed? What's changed from the founders who understood all of this? To a man understood the value of religion and morality to keep America. To a time now where such values are mocked and laughed at and left behind. And we're still expecting to maintain in America. I'll give you just a few ideas that I see happening now that contradict or are contrary to God's ways. And we need to hold the line. Look, if Christians won't hold the line against the immoral infringement in our society, who will? Who's going to stand up and say, that's wrong, that's evil? No one is left to do it if the church won't do it. And the church can't do it if we as individuals won't do it. One of the first things I see is a move from community to the individual. Think about how these men were writing, for the good of the government, for the good of the nation, for a civil society, for governance and order and goodness, for the people, the plural, people, the community. And you don't see that as much today. It's all about the individual. What does the individual want? De Tocqueville's melting pot imagery was used, remember, to describe what he called the strength of America. This is why America was so great, was that it was a nation that melts together in one large community. Everyone was focused on the good of the nation, not merely on individual welfare and feelings. But today, that's gone. The individual is king with no regard for the community. And this breeds narcissism, right? Narcissism, which is everything is involved in the self. You remember Philippians 2 and verse 4 says, let each one look after the welfare or the good of his neighbor. But that's not what we're doing. We're looking out for ourselves. Everyone is looking out for number one. I know this has been a theme of several sermons in the 5 years I've been here, but it is so true. And we are the ones that are going to have to combat this. We don't have droves of people from the world in our community coming in here to listen to what the Bible has to say on how to live a moral life in our country. They're not coming in here for that. But you, armed with the Scriptures, are going into the world. And we have an opportunity to stand for what's right. When such narcissism comes up, a person's thoughts and feelings and ideas and needs, his values, he sees all of those as being more important than anyone else's thoughts and needs and values and beliefs, and more important than the community as a whole. It's about me. And so if I am angry, I have a right to show it. And if I want to beat someone up, or if I want to kill someone, or if I want to walk into a classroom and shoot kids, that's what I get to do. Because the individual is the most important. I want to hear that speech in Washington. You won't hear that. You'll hear speeches about guns, and you'll hear speeches about mental illness, but you won't hear that one. That it's not all about you. And people need to hear that. It breeds violence on others. If I want to embrace evil, nobody has a right to tell me no. That move from community to individualism has helped develop nihilism. I was talking to my son the other day, practicing my soapbox on him. He said, Dad, what's nihilism? Nihilism is that it's a philosophy that says nothing really matters. That's what Freddie Mercury said in Bohemian Rhapsody. Nothing really matters to me. Well, that's the way a lot of people look at the world. Nothing really matters. You see, when we die, that's it. It's all over. And so get while the getting is good. Go for the gusto. Live life right here to the fullest, because there's no thought of consequences or anything beyond this. When Christian ideals dominate, people have a sense of purpose. There is meaning in life that rises above the individual, even rises above the community itself. There is meaning in life. But in nihilism, nothing matters. And it breeds hopelessness, and it also breeds emboldenedness, or it emboldens wickedness. If there's nothing beyond this, and I want to, go do something terrible, like a mass shooting, I get to do that. And I can even kill myself, and I don't have to worry about anything after that, because there's nothing that matters beyond the here and the now. And so we've told children, you're just like an animal. We've told children that you're of the same value as animals. I may step on some toes here. We had pets when I was a kid, and I loved our pets and stuff, but at no time do I remember my parents or us ever referring to our pets as our children, our fur babies. Now, I understand, you're close to your animals, you're close to your pets and things like that. But even things like that are saying that this is my fur baby, this is my real baby. And we're telling our real babies, this is your brother or your sister. We may not say those words, but that's the implication of that idea. There was a survey done not long ago about people. If you're driving down the road and there's a dog in the way and a man in the way, you can swerve and miss one, but you've got to hit the other one. Which one will you hit? Will you hit the man or the dog? I don't understand how it was not 100% I would hit the dog. Not that I hate dogs. I don't. But that man is a human being. He has a soul. And his life is infinitely more valuable than the dog. I don't care if the survey ended up 99 to 1. That's still not right. And so we are devaluing life. We're telling them that your life has no real value, and that nothing matters, and that life is hopeless. And that idea of nihilism was once a very radical idea. Most everyone understood that life had value, had meaning. But in recent decades, nihilism has been so popularized that it is all around us. It's been popularized by television and music. I've got a book called Nihilism from Seinfeld. Y'all remember the Seinfeld show? It was a show about what? Nothing. It was a show about nothing. And through all the seasons of the show, they did whatever they want, whenever they want, how they wanted to do it, because nothing mattered. There were no consequences in the end. Until the end of the series. If you'll remember, they were arrested for watching someone being robbed without stepping in and doing something. And they went to jail for it. Finally, there were consequences for their indifference and nothingness in the world. But you see how that began to popularize life about nothing. How many shows show people where there's no ramifications for what they do or what they choose. It's just the end of the show and that's it, or the end of the movie. There are no consequences. I know I'm getting long, and I apologize almost for that. The hypersexualization of our culture, even of our kids. We take little girls and we dress them up in provocative clothing, and we paint their faces with excessive amounts of makeup to make them seem more adult than they are, and then we parade them around the world. There was a lawsuit in California, Mark, a couple of years ago, of a man who was going to football games. And when the cheerleaders were jumping up and doing their splits and showing their underwear and all those things, he was snapping pictures of them. Snapping pictures. And he's putting them on the internet. Blurred out their faces. You couldn't see who the girl was, but all you could see was the hypersexualization of that girl. The parents found out about it and took him to court. Sued him. You've got to take down your website. You know what the judge said? No, he doesn't. That's what they were putting on public display at the football game in the first place. The pictures are anonymous. And so he didn't have to take the website down. Where's the outcry that they're in public that way, showing themselves in that manner? Where's the outcry for that? Why is it only when those pictures are put on the internet for other people to see? There was an entire stadium able to see those things. That's real. This hypersexualization is, the revealing clothing, suggestive dancing to emulate sex, the strategic nudity, where, we see advertising of men and women naked, but certain strategic things are covered up in just the right way. Well, that makes it okay for Madison Avenue. It doesn't make it okay for Christians. Promiscuity, sexual expectations, pop culture movies and music and magazines and novels and television, an emphasis on beauty, an overemphasis on beauty. We wring our hands today about why young ladies have self-esteem problems. We wring those hands as we drive by the billboards that glorify beauty beyond attainable goals. And we wonder why we have those kinds of things. And that breeds fornication and unrealistic fantasies about sexuality. Kids, listen, your kids, your preteens and teens that are going to be growing up, their ideas about relationship, most likely right now, are unrealistic. They are fantasies built by Disney, built by pornography, built by a world that does not understand God and does not understand His design for marriage. And if that concerns you, you have an obligation. Let me take that back. Whether it concerns you or not, you have an obligation to teach your children the truth about God's way, about the sanctity of marriage and the sanctity of the marriage bed. Because I'm telling you right now, the world is not doing it. The world is not doing that. That rejection of chastity that God wants, and I know I'm being a little explicit in these things, but brethren, we got to hear it. Tiptoeing around these things has hurt the church, and it has hurt our culture. But that rejection of chastity has brought about the devaluing of human life itself. In our casual sex culture that began in the 60s has destroyed the sanctity of marriage and the sanctity of home. It has led to the abortion industry. It has led to telling children that there's no value in their life and no value in anybody else's life. And therefore you can kill it at will. And if it can be destroyed, if that child can be destroyed in the womb, it can be destroyed in the classroom, in the movie theater, in the public square, or anywhere else that it's inconvenient to anyone. And that breeds a breakdown of the home. I could spend 10 sermons right here on the breakdown of the home. The leading factor for teens and young adults committing murder and violent crime is not race, it's not mental illness, it's fatherlessness. That's it. Less than 20% of people in prison for violent crimes, less than 20% of them came from an intact home where mom and dad were together and loved the children. Does that mean if you stay together as parents that your children definitely won't commit crime? No. Roughly, somewhere around 18% will. 80% of those in prison come from broken homes. Over 80% come from broken homes. I want to hear that speech in Washington. I want to hear a politician stand up and say, to save America, we have got to save the crumbling foundation of the home. That one probably won't be heard anytime soon either. This narcissism is so ingrained in us. It raised a president who could not lose, and when he lost, he couldn't handle it. It raised politicians who really think that their ideas are the best regardless of what the Bible says, regardless of what right and wrong says. And we are reaping that in our culture today. America simply may not be moral enough to continue to be the land of the free. Every nation struggles with the balance of security and liberty. I want to give you liberty, but some of you are not behaving well enough to have that much liberty, and so we've got to have some security. That's the balance that every nation, every society has to balance liberty and security. And the United States has upheld liberty for so long because it was based upon moral foundations and virtue. That's why it worked. We have left that behind, and so we're going to have more security. 50 years ago, did you hear a lot of people questioning the value of free speech? No, everyone understood the value of free speech. That was a great liberty to have. And now you have professors, the professor class, you have the politician class, are saying, okay, we need to put limits on free speech. And they may be right, because we may not be moral enough to have free speech. Second Amendment rights. We may not be moral enough as a nation to have an armed citizenry. That's a sad fact. And listen, I like my guns. I like to target shoot. I really do. I appreciate that they're in my home in the case of a break-in. But as a society, we may not be moral enough for that. And we're the ones that are going to make that determination to either let society just slide away or speak up and say something. So what does that mean? No matter what happens in government, and this is not a sermon just about America being the greatest. No matter what happens to our government, Christians and Christianity are the nation's hope. In fact, I would go so far as to say that Christians and Christianity are the world's hope. We're the world's hope. That's it. And if we shut down, if we quiet ourselves, if we fade into the background, we are taking away the hope of the world. And number two, we need to embrace Christian principles. That means we, as individuals, first, and then as the church, second, we need to be transformed. We cannot be like everybody else. Paul says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your spiritual service. Do not be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may test and discern what is the will of God, what is good, what is acceptable, and what is perfect. We have to have transformed lives. And we can't just plod along and be as close to the world and look as much like the world and hope to save the world. We have to be the proverbial sore thumb that sticks out. We have to be different. Tonight, I know it's not been a rousing evangelistic sermon. I understand that. But I also understand the need for us to be the salvation of the world through our own morality, our own virtue that has been given to us and guided by God. And maybe you haven't joined that soldierhood yet. Maybe you're still on the outside of the virtue and the morality. Or maybe you're a Christian and you've struggled with letting your light shine, or struggled with your own virtue and morality. Maybe you've given into the world too often, and you are feeling the weight of sin and iniquity. We're going to sing this invitation song, and if you have a need to be part of God's army, to become one of those soldiers that is not entangled with the affairs of this world, but ready to go onward, then we ask you to come and respond while we stand and while we sing.
There's a fountain